Hi everyone, my name's Ava and I'm a full-time tutor for Tutor Impact, and today I'm going to be presenting a webinar as part of our series on exam preparation on how to ace the 11 plus exam. And the 11 plus exam is a very common entrance exam that's taken in the UK, and notably for many grammar schools and private schools, you need to pass the 11 plus in order to gain a place. The 11 plus usually takes place around October, November time. So hopefully this webinar will be just in time for any of you who are preparing to take this exam. This webinar will take you through some of my key tips on how to ace the 11 plus exam, and also some tips for parents on how to create a good atmosphere for your child to succeed when revising for the 11 plus. So to begin with, what is the 11 plus exam and what does it contain? So again, the 11 plus is a form of common entrance exam that's taken for grammar and private schools in the UK, but also there are versions of this such as the CAP 4 exam, which is often taken internationally, although it's created and based in the UK. So the 11 plus exam differs for each school, but each of the exams will contain a form of English, maths, verbal reasoning, non-verbal and spatial reasoning, and often some exercises on spelling, comprehension, punctuation, and vocabulary. Each school will create their own 11 plus exam, so there is no central 11 plus exam. However, you can easily access the 11 plus exams on schools' websites, and they often contain exercises that are very similar to one another. So you could practice an 11 plus paper from many schools and still be able to pass for the school that you're applying to. And that's a key feature of the 11 plus exam. So an example question of an 11 plus exam, I'm just going to propose one here, just to give you an indication of what kind of structure the 11 plus exam takes. So you'll probably get around about 60 questions to do, and you'll likely get just over an hour to complete the actual exam, although each exam differs for each different school. But usually the beginnings questions, especially for verbal reasoning, spatial awareness, will be questions that you will easily be able to get through. So don't be tempted to rush through all the questions altogether. I would suggest spend time on the latter half of the paper because the questions are going to be slightly more complex. So an example question, this one comes from the second half of a verbal reasoning common entrance exam paper. And as you can see, the vocabulary is quite advanced. So this is not a question you'd get at the beginning. So the question says, novice is to experienced as apprentice is to blank. And it gives you multiple choice questions here to answer the question you're given. And the idea of this question is to find the relationship between the first word and the second word and apply that relationship to the second section. So the relationship between novice and experienced is that they are opposites to one another in meaning. Novice means a beginner and experienced is someone who's experienced in their job. So we want to find the opposite of apprentice, and an apprentice is obviously a beginner in a manufacturing industry or any industry nowadays. So the answer to this would be veteran, because, for example, the word veteran is often used in a military context, but often we use the word veteran to describe someone who's very seasoned in their job. So the first tip for passing an 11 plus paper is to practice. So because there are so many different types of papers, I would recommend going to the school website you're applying to and finding the past papers. The best way to do so is practice. The first time you approach a paper, you should do it in timed conditions and try your hardest to complete as many of the questions as you can. If you don't understand a question, circle it, carry on with the paper and come back to it at the end. It's never worth spending too much time on one question because there'll be so many multiple choice questions. So as many practice papers as you can access is the best way you're going to be able to prepare for a common entrance exam. And this means to practice the kinds of questions that are going to be arising in your exams. So the first thing you need to do is complete a paper or a few papers, and then mark the papers using the mark scheme. Once you've done that, you should section off the paper based on the sections. So verbal reasoning, spatial awareness, quantitative reasoning, for example, and you should mark yourself out of your score. And then you should start to identify target areas for practice. So if you were getting a higher mark in your verbal reasoning section than your spatial awareness, then you know that the spatial awareness is what you should prioritize. From this feedback, I would then suggest creating a timetable where you address the topics that you need to address the most frequently and often, and more frequently and often than those that you don't. So those are the topics you should prioritize in your revision. Number 3 would be then to find exercises and worksheets that focus on these specific target areas. So often you can then download past papers from other schools or online for free on certain sections of the common entrance exam that you can then address with your practice. So if you find a spatial awareness section the hardest, you can then go and find worksheets specifically for spatial awareness so that you can target your revision time to those specific areas. Question 4 would be repeat these questions in these target areas until you get at least an 80% score in each of these sections. So you should not move past or say you've aced a section in the common entrance exam unless you are consistently getting an 80% score or above. That should be your benchmark on whether you understand the nature and the context of these questions. And that is how I would recommend acing each section of the entrance exam individually. So how can you aid your child in preparing for an 11+ exam? An 11+ exam can be a very stressful time. It's often one of the first exams a child takes if they want to get into a school. But really the best way to encourage them is to really get them to practice little and often and in a non-stressful or cramming environment. So it's about familiarization with the styles of questions. So exposing them to exam papers early on so they don't get shocked or they don't get nervous when they see an exam paper for the first time. Encouraging regular reading and creating your own dictionaries is one thing I recommend to my students taking the 11+. So exposing yourself to different types of reading. So reading a newspaper article a day and writing down any words that you don't know into your own dictionary. Preparing little and often and not cramming is essential to passing the 11+. No night before study sessions, rather little and often every day is the best way to get your scores above 80%. And lastly, making sure that the night before the exam, you get a good night's sleep and plan something fun to do after the exam. Once they have completed the exam, it should be a time for celebration and relaxation. And beforehand, it's important that your child gets the rest that they need in order to pass the exam. So you can go on our website to look at the accompanying blog post to this webinar. And I hope it was useful. And if you have any questions about passing an 11+, you can email me at ava.sharp@tutor-impact.com.